What up, people? It's your boy, the host with the most. I do not brag or boast. And I'm coming to you guys live from coast to coast. It's your boy, I'm Chris Don One, and welcome to another fabulous rendition of Just My Opinion podcast. Today, I want you guys to rate, comment, subscribe, share this podcast, this live stream with your friends, family, as well as your followers. Let's get this YouTube channel lit in the YouTube algorithm. You heard me? If you want to further support the growth and the development of this channel, hit the join membership button. Remember, membership has its privileges, as well as you can send super chats, super stickers, as well as you can hit me up on the Cash App. $ I'm Chris the Don One. All right. If you believe in the Don Squad stand up. Everything you do helps the growth and the development of this channel. Okay, without further ado, real fast, real quick. It's not gonna be a extremely long live stream. Feeling under the weather, but like a soldier, like a trooper, I'm gonna continue to give you the best because we need to address this topic. All right. So bear with your brother. I might have a few pauses through the live stream because I'm dealing with some stuff. I'm really, really ill. I was thinking about not even doing this live stream, but nevertheless, I'm the best. Let's get into it. First order of business, and we talked about this last week. Brandon Marshall was critiquing and criticizing Shannon Sharpe, particularly with his message, particularly when he's critiquing other athletes. He feels that it's corny, it's unnecessary, and you can critique someone without getting messy. Now, we all know that Shannon Sharpe has a history of that. He's been doing it ever since he gained popularity and momentum on Undisputed. And to be perfectly fair, to be perfectly honest, at the end of the day, sports entertainment, particularly in the media side of things, it's not about the X's and O's or the Jerry's and Joe's. It's about how you can entertain your audience. You can be very informational, but your audience really likes it when you're very funny. Your delivery is spot on. And let's just be fair and be honest. Shannon Sharpe comes from the era of shock jock, shocking people by being funny, as well as giving you the X's and O's. And maybe his delivery is, a lot of people don't appreciate his delivery, particularly when he's bashing athletes. But, he's trying to entertain the audience and keep the audience glued to whatever program he's on. And Shannon Sharpe, it comes from that same era of the Skip Baylesses and the Stephen A. Smiths, the loudmouth, the shock jock of that era. And those type of people get the big time gigs, make the big time money. Those are the ones who are who are the influencers that make the biggest bag. So Shannon Sharpe approach is going to be literally different than Brandon Marshall or Fred Taylor or Tannen Fry or Ocho or even T.O., or even a Jalen Rose, where when they're critiquing today's player or whatever player in whatever era, they're going to approach it very, very seriously, not mocking or bashing the athlete, particularly when they doing something wrong on the field or on the court, because they've been there and done that. So they kind of want to respect want to respect the athlete. But if you look at the Shannon Sharpes, the Stephen A. Smiths, the Skip Bayless, I feel like another person that's rising in the ranks, particularly with those guys I just mentioned, is Stephen Smith. Stephen Smith claps back and get at a lot of athletes, particularly in the National Football League. And he's, gardening a name and a repertoire of doing this. But you got the Richard Shermans that don't take this approach. You got the Keyshawn Johnsons that really don't take that approach. Now, Michael Irvin, he can be very colorful. He can be very entertaining. He can also be very funny, but he doesn't do it on the strength of, embarrassing an athlete or coach, because they consider it respecting the game. All right. And, so some people have a different approach, or a different vehicle of delivering entertainment, by respecting the game, respecting others, and others want to be treated like others are treated. And you got others that are very cavalier about it, that wants to entertain and be funny. All right. So that's pretty much what we're talking about here. And Brandon Marshall said this on a podcast a couple of weeks ago. you know, it was mentioned, it was blazing on the it was going viral on social media and things of that nature. But when I heard the actual clip in the podcast, he didn't really clarify why he feels Shannon Sharpe is corny, and he left it up to interpretation by the people that are critiquing what he said about Shannon Sharpe. And a lot of people feel like that he's jealous of Shannon Sharpe. If you want to take that approach, you can take that approach. A lot of people are saying that he's just built different. He's like a Jalen, Brandon Marshall's like a Jalen Rose or Richard Sherman or Keyshawn Johnson. Really don't have to take the approach of what Shannon Sharpe, Stephen A. Smith, and Skip Bayless is doing. They're going to talk about the X's and O's and the Jerry's and Joe's, maybe a little bit funny here and there, but they're going to take their approach, very seriously. And one could argue like an adult. Okay. And you have others that feel like individuals, such as Shannon Sharpe, Stephen A. Smith, Skip Bayless. They're highly respected in their craft, but a lot of people have critiqued their delivery and their message. All right. You know, uh, uh, you know, uh, they just do it differently. They don't really attack those individuals. They just keep it pushing and keep it moving on. But Brandon Marshall has took it a step further. All right. So and you had others like T.O. Being very critiquing Brandon Marshall, particularly with his work. Well, particularly on how he treats people that work for him. Brandon Marshall has the I Am Athlete podcast that's very successful in the podcast circle. Shout out to the I Am Athlete podcast. They orchestrated a deal with Sirius XM. I think there's a portion of I Am Athlete podcast or them utilizing the I Am Athlete brand, and it's exclusively particularly on satellite radio with Mad Dog, a channel over there. So shout out to them. And it's been it's been making the rounds. Now the original cast of the I Am Athlete podcast, and we talked about it a couple of years ago on the fallout between Brandon Marshall versus Fred Taylor, and Shannon Fry. I think his name's Shannon Fry. Oh man, I don't forgot this guy's name that fast, that quick. I do apologize. I just mentioned his name just a few minutes ago. And Shannon and Ocho Cinco. And there's one more person that separated from the I Am Athlete podcast, and they formed their own podcast called the Pivot Podcast. And I can't think. I see his face. Can't think of his name as of right now. But as long as I keep talking, I'm going. Eventually, his name's going to pop up into my head. Well, anyway, they were on a podcast, and they talked about. They pretty much talked about Brandon Marshall's criticism or his critique with about Shannon Sharp, and he also revisit some bad history that they had with Brandon Marshall, which Brandon Marshall was on another podcast and talked about what they mentioned about not only him and Shannon Sharp, but him as well as these guys, Fred Taylor and others. They used to be the original cast of I Am Athlete podcast, and he revisited that and why it didn't work out and why these guys broken up and things of that nature. For those who've been living on the rock, allow your boy to explain. Hold on one second. My first pause. Okay, back. All right. So let's do a quick history going down memory lane. Fred Taylor, Ocho, and as well as the other two, they and Brandon Marshall, they were the original group of I Am Athlete podcast, and they broke up, like I said a moment ago. Now, when you find out why they broke up, everyone has their version of why they broke up. But the most popular one that Brandon Marshall is still utilizing to this day, he hasn't changed not one beat or one bit of it. And it seems like Fred Taylor and others were mentioned his excuse. And he says, and Brandon Marshall said that the reason why, the original cast of I Am Athlete podcast broke up and they went into the Pivot podcast, it was business. Brandon Marshall talked about how he was investing so much money into into I Am Athlete that he felt like and he believed that, and he even said this, that he wanted the guys to split the bill with 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 paying the studio, paying the extra workers, paying for promotion. He wanted them to take their own money and invest it into I Am Athlete. And at that particular time, I Am Athlete was blowing up. It made its rounds in the podcasting circle. It was starting to become a real very popular podcast for listening for the the listening audience, as well as they have a YouTube channel. And it was gaining momentum. It was, the I Am Athlete podcast was similar to what Mav Hoffa, My Expert Opinion podcast, what Gillian Wallow, $1 Million Worth of Game podcast, Joe Button podcast. And it's kind of funny, these podcasts I'm mentioning, they all had a little setbacks. A lot of people have left that podcast. And a lot of those, and another thing about these podcasts, they got extremely popular overnight. Okay. But and it has too many. It also has too many people talking in the podcast. We're going to talk about that a little bit later. But Brandon Marshall said that he went to the guys and said, "Hey, I want you. If you guys want to invest in the podcast, you get a split in ownership, and you can either do that or you can just be paid like a regular employee, where I cut you a check. I don't know if it's every week or every month, but it really doesn't matter. He cuts a check, and y'all can just come in, do your thing, and go on, and when it's done, go back to your regular lives. Okay, you don't have to worry about uh, you know paying cost and labor and paying for promotion. You just getting a check for every episode that you do. So he broke it down to that. Now, uh, he said everybody was kind of wishy washy on their decision on how they were going to proceed as far as the future with I Am Athlete podcast. I just remember that guy's name, Ryan Clark. Ryan Clark. All right. And at that time, Ryan Clark was doing ESPN. He gave them the same scenario. I think Ryan Clark was the one that was willing to uh take option A, which is he wants to be a minority owner of I Am Athlete podcast, and he was willing to split the bills and all that. Um, uh, uh, Shannon Fry, he wanted to just get a check. He wanted to get broke down to a check. Ocho, he wanted to just get a check. He didn't want the headaches and things of that nature of a business, particularly at that particular time. Y'all got to realize, as popular as I Am Athlete was in the podcasting circles and on YouTube, no one knew at that particular time that it was going to be associated with ESPN or be associated with Mad Dog, Christopher Dog Russo's a multi-year deal over there at Mad Dog Radio. So none of those deals were on the table at that time, as well as their podcasting deal. They were just doing it on the strength of the love of the game, because they, wanted to go in and, talk their talk, so to say. And they didn't know at that particular time how big that I Am Athlete could have potentially became, and what I Am Athlete eventually settled to. So at that particular time, there was no future of I Am Athlete podcast as far as, you know, branding or, being very successful. And everyone just didn't want to take, a lot of people was wishy-washy, including Fred Taylor. Brandon Marshall talked about how he wanted to talk to Fred Taylor about either becoming an owner or just getting a check. At one point, Fred Taylor wanted to become an owner, but then after he went back home and talked to his wife about it, then he wanted to just get broke down a check. And then he was just wishy-washy. He didn't really know, because it was an uncertain future with I Am Athlete podcast. Uh, I think at that time, I Am Athlete podcast didn't have any brand deals or, sponsored by FanDuel, or, what a lot of these other podcasts are ultimately are getting or already had. The $1 Million Worth of Game podcast, they were sponsored by Barstool Sports. That's a bigger conglomerate. All right. So they was tied into Barstool Sports. So you could see the future of $1 Million Worth of Game down the road. Joe Budden podcast was sponsored by, had deals with Patreon, had a deal with Patreon, had the Cash App thing. And at one point in time, the Joe Budden podcast was associated with Spotify. So you can see the future was very bright and very clear for Joe Budden. When you look at My Expert Opinion podcast with Matt Hoffa, there was talk that Revolt wanted to sponsor that podcast. All right. So, you could see somewhat of a future with My Expert Opinion podcast. But when you look at the I Am Athlete thing, you didn't see none of those deals down the road. And that was an uncertain territory and an uncertain future, a gamble that a lot of those guys didn't want to take at that time. All right. Uh, so basically, Brandon Marshall, was breaking checks to these guys and was, taking care of all the responsibilities when it comes to the studio, renting the studio, employees, promotion, things of that nature. And then I Am Athlete, I Am Athlete podcast started taking off. Okay, you started, it was starting to be associated with ESPN. ESPN somewhat promoted I Am Athlete podcast. And then you started seeing them get these deals, such as, I Am Athlete podcast, being associated with Mad Dog Sports. And they was getting these deals, and then you start seeing a future of I Am Athlete podcast. And these guys saw that future as well. They came back to Brandon Marshall and they said, "Hey, that deal that you offered of us having stake in the company and becoming minority partners, we want that deal now, because now we see the future of it." Okay, and at that time, Brandon Marshall was didn't that deal was off the table, and Brandon Marshall would have been a fool to, okay, these guys basically, left you hanging and left you with the bill. And now when they starting to see a future in this podcast, now they want to be minority partners. And that's where there was conflict, and that's where there was issues with the group. And then the group decided, you know what, let's just form our own podcast. We'll call it the Pivot Podcast. And I felt like, now a lot of people are going to say, once they broke up, I Am Athlete podcast wasn't isn't the same no more. It's not as popular like it used to be. But you can say the same thing. You can make the same argument with the Pivot Podcast, because, like I said about Joe Button and Rory and Maul, in that situation, I utilize that same argument with I Am Athlete and the Pivot Podcast. Now, a lot of people thought that, Joe Button took a step back with his podcast. Rory and Maul was gaining some success with their podcast. When you look at their first couple of episodes, they had more listeners and more views than Joe Button at one point of time. But like I said, what really actually happened was you divided that audience that was, effing with you when y'all was one podcast. And the same thing is happening with the Pivot and I Am Athlete podcast. Once they separated, you're just splitting your audience. All right. So the I Am Athlete podcast isn't, as popular as it used to be. It's still a very popular podcast, but not as popular as it used to be. And the Pivot is in the same situation. Okay. And that's what happens when you have so many people on a podcast, because you're going to have people that's going to have different perspectives. They're going to have different values, how valuable they are to the podcast. You're going to have ego. You're going to have jealousy. But ultimately, you're going to have to make business decisions that could affect your relationship with, with your colleagues. And let's just face facts and face, Ryan Clark, Brandon Marshall, Shannon, Shannon Fry, Fred Taylor, Ocho. They are mad friends, friends to the end. And these friends form like they form like Voltron to make this podcast. And now they have broken up. They went their separate ways, and there's some hostility. And I think what ultimately happened was they killed their viewership, they killed their popularity, and now you got to split that. as well as their friendship is no more. Okay. So you got that situation. Hold on one second. I thought he said he wasn't going. I'm back. Give me a second, guys. Give me a second, guys. Give me a second, guys. All right. Okay, so where were we? Okay, so yeah, so the I Am Athlete podcast and the Pivot podcast, they just split their audience in half and they ruined their relationship as far as them being friends. And that happened a couple of years ago, and still, you know, even to today, they're so distant in what they believe actually happened and what actually took place, and why they're not doing the podcast together. And I've said this time and time again, and I'm being proven right time and time again, despite what people say in the comment section. You can't mix business with family or your closest friends, because when the business goes south and you're forced to consolidate or close the business or lay off certain individuals, and those certain individuals happen to be your family members or your friends, there's going to be some hostility. Okay, that's never going to go down very peaceful. Okay, that's why I tell people, when you know go into business, it's hard to go in business with your friends or with your family, because if the business goes south and you have to make the tough decision of you know uh, letting go of your family member or your friend, is not going to be very peaceful. It's going to be some hostility, and it's going to ruin your relationship with them. Okay, or make your relationship sour or difficult. Okay. um and that's pretty much what happened with I Am Athlete and the Pivot podcast. But the same argument can be made with the Joe Button podcast. They had the same situation happen over there. Roy and Maul, they went their separate ways. Joe Button went to his separate ways. Joe Button is back stronger than ever. He got Queen's Flip. He's got oh, I forgot that girl's name. Um oh, I forgot her name. Melissa Ford, Ison Ish. And there's another guy that they're, trying. He's in a couple of episodes here and there. But Joe Button rebranded and unloaded with another group of individuals. A lot of people say there's too many mics on the podcast. Um, but in actuality, the Joe Button podcast is, back to its regular scheduled programming, and they're successful than they ever was, even with Rory and Maul. Okay, $1 million worth of game. They had their setbacks with I forgot the chick name. Don't call me a white girl. I forgot her actual name. I think her real name is Morgan, Mona, and Tony the Closer. They're no longer associated with $1 million worth of game. And when they left, that's when they got a bigger deal with Barstool Sports. And now those brothers are doing great. Is doing his thing. But I forgot. I think his name was Devin the Dude. Devin the Dude. It left the $1 million worth of game podcast. Um, it wasn't very positive. he formed his own podcast with another group of guys. And and don't call me a white girl. She left, but it's she's not having any hostilities with with Gilly or Waldo. Tony the closer left, and that got kind of personal. Okay, but you see, how that affect I mean, they had their stumbling, they had their setbacks. You see how they're bigger and better than ever. And if you look at Math Hoffa, and his podcast, he had some members left, Heineken and EXO, and then Sean Bigger, he left. He's gone on and doing his own thing. Um, I don't think it's successful of what Sean Bigger is doing. I think EXO and Heineken got Bag Fuel, their podcast, but you know, they're doing their own thing, and it's not as successful as my Expert Opinion podcast. Okay, but this is what's happening in the podcasting space. And we're going to talk about a little bit later of the future of podcasting, particularly on social media. But let's get back to Brandon Marshall and the Pivot podcast. So they was very talkative about Brandon Marshall's comments of Shannon Sharp, and T.O. chimed in and echoed the same sentiments of what the Pivot podcast, what Fred Taylor, Fred Taylor, out of everyone in that group, Fred Taylor had a lot to say about Brandon Marshall. And I feel like the rest of the members of the Pivot podcast has moved on. It was a setback, but they're all moving on. It's unfortunate, but I feel like all of them has pretty much moved on. But Fred Taylor's got a lot of luggage left with that dynamic between when he used to be associated with I Am Athlete podcast. Because I felt like out of all the individuals, when we first heard why they are no more, Fred Taylor got the most heat. Because Brandon Marshall talked about how he was pitching this, you can either own I Am Athlete, or you just want to get cut a check every week and you can go about doing what you've been doing. Fred Taylor was wishy-washy. He was one way, then another way, then he was unable. He tried to call him. Fred Taylor would never pick up the phone. And Fred Taylor pretty much ghosted him. And I feel like out of all the people that he talked about that no longer work at I Am Athlete podcast, Fred Taylor took the most criticism. And a lot of people, and I even said this, that Fred Taylor handled that situation not good. Not good at all. All right. You want you're telling everybody that you want a minority purchase in I Am Athlete, but if you look at how you went about it, it just didn't. It just you just don't look good. It's almost like you was trying to run away from the responsibilities of it. That's on the outside looking in. That's what it looks. That's what it looks like. And I feel like out of all the individuals, Fred Taylor got the most heat and got the most criticism about it. So I feel like that's, I kind of understood why Fred Taylor was more vocal about it, because he was heavily criticized about it. But nevertheless, T.O. echoes Fred Taylor's sentiments. And, T.O. said that, Brandon Marshall, what do he know? If you talk to anybody that did business with Brandon Marshall, and a lot of people are not going to say a lot of good things about Brandon Marshall. And Brandon Marshall is is eerie similar to what Mav Hoffa is doing. You know, everyone has the opinion that Mav Hoffa is the type of brother that don't want to pay uh the people that's putting in a lot of work on these podcasts, and he has a lot of issues, you know, giving people their money. And Brandon Marshall is cut from that. Jesus Christ, why is that dude up there, man? Anyway, we're gonna keep it pushing. All right, we're just gonna definitely keep it pushing. All right. So Brandon Marshall, you know, he's not looking good. All right. And I've told people this, that when people have this image of you, it's hard to good, bad, or whatever. It's hard to shake that image when everyone is saying the same thing about you. All right. And you're going to have a lot of people that's going to work, that's going to work with you, and they no longer have a working relationship with you, but they all say the same thing. You know, Brandon Marshall, as well as Mav Hoffa, they're the type of individuals that don't want to pay someone. And that's what a lot of people are going to say. At one point, Joe Button was you know, a lot of people were saying that about Joe Button when he had his falling out with Rory and Mal. Oh, what a difference a year makes with adding Melissa Ford, Queen Flip, Ice and Ish. Later, well, he always had Ice and Ish. And it seems like he's evolving the podcast by adding different people to the podcast. Okay. So, I mean, that's the image that people have about Brandon Marshall. I don't know if it's true. I don't know if it's false. But that's a narrative that Brandon Marshall is going to have to address. And I feel like that narrative is more bigger than what he can ever say about Shannon Sharp. Now, I can sort of co-sign to Brandon Marshall in his belief that Shannon Sharp do some clownish stuff by ridiculing a lot of athletes, not respecting a lot of athletes. There's a way you can critique athletes without being personal, without utilizing their mistakes as a comedic joke or a punchline. There's a right and a wrong way of doing things. But at the end of the day, Brandon Marshall, here's where we, you know, you know, stray off, if you want to say that. Um, when you look at today's media, people, particularly in sports media, people don't care about the stats and the statistics and what this player did to this system, or how this system affected the player. Um, that no one cares about telling the story step by step. The only thing people want, the only thing people care about, particularly when you're talking about sports media, is the W and the L, and your delivery has to be very entertaining, very comedic, very funny. People don't want the raw stats, the raw details of the actual game. People get entertained by you making fun of someone's um, mistakes in a game. That's why Shacking a Fool is so popular on Inside the NBA. That's why the inside the NBA, even though they talk about basketball and stats and the games and things of that nature, but what makes that show so successful and so popular is the chemistry between Charles Barkley, Kenny Smith, Ernie, and Shaquille O'Neal. But how funny Shaquille O'Neal and Charles Barkley are, um, when they're talking about different players, or when they're talking about Kenny Smith. You know, It's the dynamic of that group, but that group being very entertaining. And people are willing to watch it live from midnight to almost 2 a.m. in the morning live, and checking the re-air of it the next day, because everyone wants to know what Charles Barkley said about whoever, or what Shaquille O'Neal said about whoever. Okay, they don't care about the stats and the statistics and the game breakdown or any of that crap. People care. People want to be entertained. Remember that Gladiator song? I mean, that Gladiators movie. Are you entertained? People want to be entertained. People don't want to be informed. They want to be entertained. So that's how it works. With the Daily Show, they take a different perspective of talking about the news and politics and things of that nature. But it's a extremely popular show. Not because of you being informed about what transpired in the political side of things and the Republican Party or the Democratic Party. It's just how to utilize these political stories and turn them into jokes, into one-liners. Okay, and that's similar to what Inside the NBA does. People want to be entertained. Is the bottom line. All right. So there you have it. I could go on and on and on about it, but that's pretty much a nutshell of the situation between Brandon Marshall and I Am Athlete versus Fred Taylor and the Pivot Podcast. And they're gonna have issues. I wouldn't necessarily call it beef, but they're gonna have issues with one another because of they have a past with one another. They used to be friends, and now not so much. So it is what it is. Okay, but ultimately, and I've been hearing this on YouTube, and YouTube is going to uh they're changing a lot of stuff, particularly with podcasting, because everybody and their mama has a podcast. Okay. Um, I heard Queen Naja is going to start a podcast, on YouTube. Stephen A. Smith has a show on YouTube. You can consider it a podcast. Marcellus Wiley been on YouTube for a minute. He's got somewhat of a podcast on his YouTube channel. You know, um, every personality in music, in news, in sports, in entertainment, movies, television shows. A lot of these stars, influencers, social media influencers are starting podcasting. And now I've said this years ago, how podcasting is an oversaturated market because now everybody is doing a podcast. And podcasting was super popular during the pandemic because there was really nothing else you can do, you know. And podcasting used to be super popular uh before the pandemic, during the pandemic, and somewhat after the pandemic. But podcasting is an oversaturated market. Everyone has a podcast, and it's oversaturated. And it's too many people doing a podcast. Now I've heard that YouTube and it just all the other social media apps have already reached this conclusion. TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, um, and now YouTube has joined in with the other social media apps where they're going to cut the revenue of podcasting on their, particularly podcasting, as well as people talking about entertainment and rumor and gossip and things of that nature. They're going to be cutting a lot of people's checks. Now, some people are estimating 70%. And you got a lot of people out there that, you know, and you, I remember Adam 22 talking about this a couple of years ago, how he's no longer going to do lives of No Jumper doing 2-hour podcasts, and he's just going to, cut it down and just, just do an already recorded No Jumper podcast. And he got rid of a lot of personalities that were eating on No Jumper. Gina Views, AD, he got rid of a lot of those personalities. And he replaced them with cheaper Flacco, even though Flacco is a star on the horizon. And when you look at Sharp, he already had Sharp, but he had too many personalities doing the same thing and really wasn't bringing no huge value to No Jumper. So he got rid of a lot of personalities, and now everyone is doing their own thing, sort of doing their own thing. And most of them, like AD, the community channel, the community podcast, it has its ups and downs. I think Gina Views, if you look at her YouTube channel, I think her biggest view on her own YouTube channel is when she interviewed Deion Sanders' daughter. All right. But her views are nowhere near the views she was getting when she was on No Jumper. And AD, the only time he gets the biggest views on his YouTube channel is when he's talking about No Jumper and Adam 22. But ever since he has, eventually, you just can't, talk about the same thing every day, all day. And when he starts to talk about other things, the views are there, but he's not making nowhere near the views as Adam 22 and No Jumper. But you're starting to see a lot of these independent podcasts and these independent personalities, they're cutting freight. They're cutting a lot of people out of the payroll because there's a lot of people that can see the forest from the trees, and they knew YouTube eventually was going to come down this path. Facebook has already came down this path. Instagram has already came down this path. TikTok has already came down this path. All the successful apps have came down this path. And a lot of things have transpired. Alex Jones situation, Tasha K situation. A lot of these social media apps don't want to be ridiculed and pay and have bad press and get sued over a lot of these people being reckless on their platforms. So YouTube has cut a lot of people's checks. Some has estimated up to 70%, which a lot of people are changing the way how they're doing business. And you got, like Adam 22, he doesn't let go of a lot of his personality. Gillian Wallow was really ahead of the curve. It's just only them two that are the stars of it. If you look at Mav Hoffa, it's really Mav Hoffa the star and a collection of other guys. I'm pretty sure those other guys are not making the same amount or even more than Mav Hoffa. So he cut his freight down. He cut his payroll down. And if you look at I Am Athlete, it's really Brandon Marshall and the others. Brandon Marshall is more of the star of I Am Athlete podcast. Now, he done changed it into a network. He has other things that he's doing on I Am Athlete that carries the I Am Athlete name, but he doesn't have to pay a lot of people to do that podcast. He doesn't have Fred Jones. He don't have to pay Fred Jones no more. He don't have to pay Acho, and others. So yeah, I don't know what's going on right here. Maybe some weird stuff going on. It's like this. I don't hold up 1 second, guys. You be seeing some crazy things inside your window. Cause see, my patio, I got a patio, but I can see the front of the parking lot, and it's crazy. I don't understand. I mean, I'm pretty sure there's a reasonable explanation. Maybe they're taking someone to work, but it's like 5:14 in the morning. Okay. And now this girl is going through her purse. She got her purse on the hood of her truck, trying to find her keys. And I'm saying to myself, why you didn't have your keys in your hand before you left out the apartments? It it's beyond me. But people do weird shit. Okay. But back into what we were talking about. All right. So yeah. Um, you're starting to see a lot of people reevaluating and changing their business structure because of being, a long time ago, being independent, you had your own control, you was your own boss, and you was making mad money doing it that way. And I even said when Shannon Sharp, remember when Shannon Sharp was let go by Fox Sports One? A lot of people think he got fired. I still believe that the bosses over there at Fox Sports One, this was a business decision for them. And I kept saying, and I still believe that they were thinking, if we sign Shannon Sharp to a max contract, now we got Shannon Sharp on a max contract, on a max deal. We got Skip Bayless on a max deal, but we're the second popular show in sports entertainment because we were never going to dethrone ESPN First Take, and that was with Shannon Sharp. So they said, why max these guys out when we're not going to have the best show? We're not going to be number one. And I think it was more business than Shannon Sharp getting fired, or Shannon Sharp um, really wasn't the popular one with upper management, or maybe he had issues with upper management. I still believe that uh, they came to that decision because they're looking at it as um, it's not like we was going to have the best show. We was going to have the number one show. But that's, well, I done did plenty of live streams of videos. Y'all can go check those videos out. I'm not going to, elaborate on it on this episode, okay? But still, you're starting to, when Shannon Sharp made this decision and he became a free agent, you kept hearing these rumors that FanDuel wanted to do an exclusive deal with Shannon Sharp, on the outside looking in, maybe Spotify, maybe Amazon, maybe iTunes, well, Apple. Um, you kept hearing, NBC Sports was going to pitch a deal to him. He may go back to CBS Sports because CBS Sports is suffering. You kept hearing all of these bigger, as well as ESPN. But we talked about all those deals, and no one knew what direction Shannon Sharp was going to go, and no one knew that Shannon Sharp decision was going to be this decision. And his decision is, he signed a deal with the Volume, that's Colin Cowherd digital network, where Club Shay Shay is going to be sponsored by the Volume. He's also going to be doing First Take on Mondays and Tuesdays. He signed a contract with ESPN on a part-time, sort of like a part-time situation. And he was going to do additional content on his YouTube channel with Nightcap with Ocho Cinco. And no one knew he was going to go this route. And he basically said, I'm going to be independent. I'm going to control my own future. I'm going to be my own boss. I'm not going to be tied down in another ironclad contract where I don't get to say or get to do what I want to do. Now, I still believe that Stephen A. Smith and Shannon Sharp is going to help one another out, because Stephen A. Smith, even though he's threatening, he's got 2 more years on his contract, and he's threatening to just go solely independent. Okay, but we all can see the forest from the trees. We know that Stephen A. Smith wants ESPN to sign him, but he wants a max contract. He wants a better deal than what he's got right now. And Shannon Sharp is thinking, yeah, I can take this contract for now, but if the ratings still go up, if the viewership still go up, then all the PowerPoints are going to be to my point of view, and ESPN will have no choice but to rip the contract that they have up right now, ripping out the plastic like I'm brand new. They're going to rip up this contract, and they're going to give him a better contract, and he's going to get a bigger bag, and he's going to be heavily sponsored by the ESPN brand, because ESPN business-wise is struggling. Okay, they're losing a lot of subscribers on satellite and cable TV. And what ESPN and what Disney is doing is they're waiting out these subscribers that went away from satellite and cable TV, and now they're paying for all these streaming service apps. But every other few months, you start hearing these streaming service apps going up and up and up with their monthly fees. Netflix is going to go up. Disney Plus is going to go up. Hulu, I suspect, is going to go up. HBO Max is going to go up. Paramount Plus. I feel like Paramount Plus might be the odd man out, where they may just close the Paramount Plus app out and just distribute their independent content to other platforms. You already see AMC Plus, a lot of their content is on Netflix, it's on Hulu. You slowly but surely, you're starting to see AMC Plus, have their content on these other streaming services apps, as well as Amazon, because if you go on Amazon, they got the Paramount Plus app, they got the AMC Plus app, they got the what's that? The MGM app, they got the BET, they got NBA, they got NFL, they got it all under one roof. And you can buy it separately through Amazon, as well as Amazon, is pushing their own content. And I feel like Apple is going to start buying out a lot of these IP properties, but that's another time for another story, really for another channel. Okay, which is don't forget to subscribe to my other YouTube channel as well as this one. Rate, comment, subscribe, hit the notification bell, share this content with your friends, family, and followers. But let's get back to our regular scheduled programming. So Disney is waiting us out because they believe that a lot of people who have jumped the ship on satellite and cable television, sooner rather than later, is going to come back to satellite and cable television, because people are going to start saying, well, if I pay for 2 or 3 of these streaming services, it'll be almost the same as me keeping my satellite and cable packages. I mean, I'm really not saving nothing. Plus, with satellite and cable, I had a multitude of other networks that I could, look at. And if you look at what Comcast is doing, as well as Spectrum, they're bundling a lot of these streaming services. A lot of these streaming services apps, like Peacock is bundled, AMC Plus is bundled, Paramount Plus is bundled. Paramount Plus is bundled on the Walmart app. So, and then Verizon got something where you can bundle what you want to bundle with their phone service. And I'm pretty sure AT&T has it, and Sprint has it, and yada yada yada. But eventually, I know some people, as well as myself, I got like Disney Plus, Hulu, Amazon. Okay, Disney Plus, Hulu, Amazon, Netflix. At one point in time, I had the Peacock, and I got Paramount Plus. So that's 6 apps. And I'm, am I safe? By doing this, am I saving less money than just keeping my satellite and cable? No. It's almost the same or more. And then plus, these streaming services, the prices are going up because the subscriptions are going down. I feel like the age of streaming service apps, it's going to die off real soon. And the only ones that are going to continue to have these streaming services apps, unless they got a lot of backing with money, or the content is just that good. And I just don't see, a lot of these streaming service apps surviving down the road. They're going to have to consolidate with other streaming services apps, or bundle their applications with phone plans or digital cable or satellite. So Disney is waiting it out because they know eventually these customers are going to come back to satellite and cable. And if you've been checking out what Disney has been doing, they've been changing their contracts with Comcast, Spectrum, and I forgot the other cable company that had a blackout for a couple of days until they reach an agreement. So yeah, I mean, eventually, people are going to say to themselves, "I'd rather just keep my satellite and cable. I'm not really saving a lot. If anything, excuse me, I'm losing in value. I'm not getting a lot of channels." So yeah, we're gonna have to, yeah. So, but back to, going independent 2 years ago was, betting on yourself was what was a good thing, particularly if you already had an audience, particularly if you're already iconic, if you have your own brand, you have your own name. But now, a lot of these people that were going to YouTube, like the Stephen A. Smiths of the world, the Brandon Clark, the Marcellus Wileys, they was leaving television. You're gonna start seeing even I don't know, I forgot his name that fast, that quick. Um it'll come to me later. Shoot, I forgot his name. Pat McAfee. You know, Pat McAfee was hugely popular without the presence of satellite and cable. Now he signed a contract with ESPN. ESPN is banking on Pat McAfee as well as Stephen A. Smith to get the subscribers back to ESPN, which I think eventually people are going to jump back on the ship of satellite and cable. So yeah, it Disney is betting on themselves, and they feel like a lot of subscribers or a lot of their viewership is coming back to satellite and cable. They done made signings with Pat McAfee, with Shannon Sharp. They already got Stephen A. Smith. They're betting on themselves that these people want to see them on a full-time level. And a lot of these personalities that were making the jump to independence, like doing your own YouTube channel or doing your own podcast, they're coming back to television because a lot of these networks can observe. A lot of these networks can give these personalities that bag, and plus give them the leverage to have a viewership and to maintain it. So, I thought, what, 3 months ago, going independent was the best route to go if you're a personality. Now, if you look at, if going independent means you have to depend on what Facebook is going to be doing from here on out, what YouTube is going to be doing from here on out, what TikTok and Instagram is going to be doing from here on out. And it seems like YouTube is joining a lot of these social media applications, and they're cutting a lot of people's salary. I mean, a lot of people's money, particularly if you're independent and if you're making your own content. Now, to the small folks like to me and to others, yeah, it's no hill of beans because at the end of the day, I don't base my livelihood on making content on YouTube. Do I get paid? Yeah, I get paid. I get a check every now and again. Okay, but it's not to the point to where I can quit my day job. So I can still do this and still do my day job, and I make good money at my day job. But to somebody like a Stephen A. Smith, a Shannon Sharp, or Marcellus Wiley, um, and for potential people out there like a Chris Broussard or whatever personality in politics, sports, or in entertainment, a Denzel Washington, for those, they're going to really think about it and say, is it even worth going independent? Am I better off having a studio foot the bill and give me my bag, or a network to uh take take care of all the expenses and just give me my bag? Yeah, being independent, you're your own boss. You play by your own rules, but there's a lot of cost and labor that you have to factor in. And you may not get a bigger return when it comes to getting a bigger bag going independent than just signing a big deal with Spotify or Apple or Amazon or FanDuel, and get your money that way. or a network like CNN or ESPN or ABC or NBC and get your money that way. The bigger bags are with the networks or with a media company. Those are going to be, that's going to be the future. That's where the bigger bags are going to go to, because being independent and doing your own thing, it don't necessarily mean you're going to get a bigger bag. And you're going to start seeing a lot of these podcasts associate their IPs to other media companies and media networks, like a Revolt. A Revolt would be perfect for an I Am Athlete or a Pivot podcast or the Pivot podcast, would be perfect for them. Or being associated with ABC or CNN or TNT, a network, a media network, or an entertainment network, or a media company. You're going to start seeing a lot of these independent podcasts associate themselves to bigger networks, and those networks are going to own a lot of these podcasts. Now, there's going to be some here and there that can dictate their own future and still have ownership with their IP, but others are not going to be able to negotiate those deals. And you're going to start seeing podcasts such as Rory and Maul fall off a little bit. They're going to continue to be independent, but that bag is not going to be it's not going to be a big bag. So they're going to have to figure out ways to generate money in different ways. You might see them create a kick channel, or twist t I mean or twist I'm about to say twist Twitch TV. You might see them do live streams. You might see them go on the road and do show appearances. Okay. I think the major stars, the A-list stars, they're going to be associated with networks or media companies. They're going to have a big juggernaut of a corporation behind them. And you're going to look at, and a lot of these B-list, C-list, D-list guys, they're just going to get whatever deal that they can get. And you're going to start seeing a lot of podcasts fold real fast, real quick. Case in point, they used to have a podcast. It was a couple. It was DJ Envy and Gia. Don't say Gina, because if you say Gina, a lot of people in they come after you in the comment section. But Gia is short for Gina, but it's missing a letter. But that's neither here nor there. But they used to have a podcast, and they stopped doing it. Not because it was super popular. It wasn't profitable. They wasn't making a profit on their podcast, and they just stopped doing it. So you're going to see a lot of people making some real changes with their staff, with the personalities. You're going to start seeing a lot of podcasts that's going to be a one-man podcast or a two-man podcast the most. Occasionally you'll see a three-man podcast, occasionally, but no more than that. And you're going to start seeing these podcasts, either do one or two things. A big corporation is tied to them, or if they do go independent, they will have to figure out other ways to generate extra income to in the pursuit of chasing that bag. But I feel like with this recent decision, what YouTube is doing, like YouTube was the last hope for independent people, independent podcasts, and independent personalities. YouTube was the last road if you want to change. You would not, and it would not surprise me none. Maybe a year or 2 years down the road, Stephen A. Smith, just stop doing YouTube. Well, either stop doing the Stephen A. Smith show on YouTube and maybe get it elevated on ESPN Plus, or don't do a lot of shows, or just stop doing a lot of shows on this YouTube channel, because YouTube was the last line of defense for a lot of these independent content creators, because you wasn't getting no bag on Facebook. Facebook got rid of Facebook TV. Red Table Talk is not on Facebook. And was anybody chasing for Red Table Talk, Jada Pinkett Smith podcast? Nope. There were no takers. Grand opening, grand closing. There were no takers. So that just tells you that even Facebook wasted a lot of money. I mean, Red Table Talk had its moments, but I don't think there was a surplus of people that was constantly tuning in to what Jada Pinkett Smith had to say about Tupac or her entanglement stories. I mean, she tried to keep this podcast very relevant with her personal life, and it just didn't work. Which, by the way, on Jada Pinkett Smith news, her book flopped. Okay, but that's neither here nor there. But that's what I'm saying. A lot of these, at first, and I said this a month ago, well, maybe 2 months ago. I talked about, going independent is a lot better than trying to get a deal with the networks or with a media company. And if you look at the recent events, particularly with streaming services and streaming applications, when you look at social media, it seems like YouTube has already made. It seems like YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram already made their decision as far as making content over there, particularly if when you want to do podcasting and anything like that. They already made their decision on that. I think Spotify is cool with what they already have as far as their listening audience go, but Spotify's not trying to expand on a visual level, as well as iTunes. They're not trying to expand none of these podcasts on a visual level. As far as listening goes, they're cool with it, but it's not a lot of podcasts on either of those platforms. Well, not a lot of successful podcasts, let's put it that way. There's plenty of podcasts, but not a lot of successful podcasts, because it's an oversaturated market. Okay. But yeah, it's getting spooky out there. And a long time ago, people would, and I even said it a month ago, independent is the way to go. A month ago, I kept saying Shannon Sharp made the best deal, made the best decision for himself, because he gets to dictate what he wants to do. He can be his own boss. He still got the ESPN gig, but on a part-time level. But I also told you guys that the contract he's currently on with ESPN, that contract is going to be ripped up real fast, real quick, when the tandem of Shannon Sharp and Pat McAfee get the viewership back at ESPN. And I feel like Disney is playing the long game. They're thinking that a lot of those subscriptions, a lot of those subscribers that cut the cord and left satellite and cable, they're going to make their way back here, because if you look at when you look at Netflix and Hulu and Disney Plus and Amazon and Apple TV, when you look at all of these streaming services, Paramount, the Peacock, it's just too many of them. And time a consumer subscribes to 5 or more of them, they're paying the same amount of money they're paying the same amount of money on entertainment than they were when they were just only paying for their cable bill and their satellite bill. And a lot of these streaming services apps are going up with their monthly fees, not going down. But yeah. So yeah, that's all I got for today's podcast. First, like to thank everyone that have been watching and listening to my videos and to my lives. I really do appreciate that from the bottom of my heart. Guys, do not forget to hit the like button. If you're not subscribed, subscribe. Hit the notification bell. Share this content with your friends, family, and followers. There's links down below to my audio podcast as well as my other YouTube channels. Sometime this week, I'm going to upload a video on I'm Krista Don 1 TV. It's your boy, the host with the most. I do not brag or boast, and I'm coming to you guys live from coast to coast. It's your boy. I'm Krista Don 1. I will see you guys later on this week. If something breaks, I will definitely talk about it in a video. If not, check me out on I'm Krista Don 1 TV and I'm Krista Don 1. I have 3 YouTube channels, so go check them out. Subscribe and enjoy. You will not be disappointed. I promise you. I will see you guys next Monday on the live version of Just My Opinion podcast. This is season 3. I will see you. Deuces, guys. Hope everyone has a great, is this Monday? Yeah, Monday morning. Okay. I'll talk to you guys later. Hopefully I'll get a lot better, health-wise. I'm really under the weather. I got a frog in my throat. And I'm just not feeling it. So I'm gonna just get me some tea and sip on that and heal my throat. I think I'm under the weather. I got a little cold that I'm trying to fight. But I'm up out of here. I'll talk to you guys later. I'm gone. Deuce. Outro.